Bills Mafia. Tonight on the Air Raid Hour, we are diving straight ahead into the 2025 offseason as we recap the 2025 Senior and Shrine Bowls. We will be assessing the Bills' biggest positional needs and prospects from the games we believe could fit those needs. Stay tuned. This is one you won't want to miss. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to I guess this is the first off-season edition of the Air Raid Hour. I already got Ryan Tonkin coming in saying Buffalo Bills Super Bowl 2025, and this is where we get that conversation started. This is how we manifest that 2025 Buffalo Bills Super Bowl here at the Air Raid Hour. We're into the offseason. You can tell from the title of the show, we're going to talk about a number of things this evening, from Myles Garrett's trade request today, Maxx Crosby, another edge rusher who could be on the market. We're going to talk a little bit of that. We're going to talk about some changes to the Buffalo Bills coaching staff. And obviously, we're going to break down the Buffalo Bills positional needs. And then from there, we're going to talk about some guys that popped both at the Senior Bowl this week and the Shrine Bowl last week, and how those players could fit what the Buffalo Bills want and need this offseason, as the Bills have a pick in the first round for now, and 2 picks in the second round, and a whole bunch of compensatory picks coming in. So we're getting things kicked off this evening. Our first offseason show, Dave.
First off-season show, and just some of the things that we're going to be doing as well. We'll get this kind of going here in the next couple of weeks. We're going to maybe have a couple fresh looks here for some of the things on the show, as far as some of the backgrounds and overlays, maybe some new graphics and animation too, just to try to really up the production quality for you all during the off-season as we kind of take this journey. This stretch be really between, we'll say, the Super Bowl and the draft is really one of the more intense stretches we have for this show when it comes to just what we do as far as time and investment. This next 3 months is a big investment as far as getting you all ready for the draft, free agency, and all of that. And we want to bring you as top of the line quality as we can. So not just the content, but the production as well. We're going to try to up our game, as we always try to find ways to even improve ourselves. A little self-coaching, as Sean McDermott likes to say.
We got the Trek reviewer coming in saying Myles Garrett? RJ Melville coming in saying the Bills need to bring in Myles Garrett if they ever want to win a championship. Hall of Fame players don't come available almost ever, especially in their prime. Let's kick off the show with that this evening, because I think that's what a lot of people want to talk about. Obviously, the big breaking news today, Myles Garrett announcing that he would like a trade from the Cleveland Browns. That is going to be a very difficult process for the Cleveland Browns financially, as they are going to have to make a lot of moves to sort of be able to take on the burden of his dead cap hit. So I wouldn't say it's a guarantee Myles Garrett gets traded just quite yet. But there's another name to talk about as well in this conversation, and that is Las Vegas Raider Maxx Crosby. But Brandon Beane says the Bills will not be big spenders in free agency. He said that in his post-game press conference, or his postseason press conference. No shocker there, but maybe the Buffalo Bills will be willing to spend to extend a guy that they trade for. Obviously, I mentioned Myles Garrett requested that trade today. Maxx Crosby could be looking to get out of Vegas. Garrett is 29. Crosby is 28. Both of these guys are in their prime. Crosby is a guy who he raised some eyebrows with media appearances where he has spoken very highly of Buffalo and the culture they have here in Buffalo. The Bills had him in for a pre-draft visit in his draft year, and he even stated that he thought he was going to be a Buffalo Bill. Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby, premier, elite, prime edge rushers. Sean McDermott stated at his end of the season press conference that you need 2 to 3 game changers on each side of the ball. I don't think we have 2 to 3 game changers on the defensive side of the football right now. Should the Bills be all in trying to make this happen for either Maxx Crosby or for Myles Garrett?
I would say yes. Like, just if you're going to look for a binary yes no answer, should they be in on one of these guys? The answer should be yes, right? I mean, it would be a little bit of now. It doesn't mean they're going to get one of these guys, but I think if you listen to what Brandon Beane and what Sean McDermott said, saying you need 2 to 3 game-changing guys, and Brandon Beane saying, heck yeah, I'd love to take a swing at a guy if they become available, but these types of guys don't ever come available. If they don't, then it's kind of like not, it's kind of going against what they said, right? And they've been pretty truthful, I would say, for the most part in some of these things, and in a little bit more candid in this season and press conference, I think, that they have been in the past. Does that mean they're going to get one of these guys? Not necessarily, but you'd like to think that they will, Brandon Beane will make the phone call. The Bills have always been one of those teams that tends to get linked to a lot of these types of off-season rumors for various reasons. It was JJ Watt a couple years ago, as we remember, and things of that nature. So it would make sense. I would be totally on board with them going in for Myles Garrett. And as Adam says here, with our first round pick history in recent past, it might be worth it because we haven't been that great at hitting on some of these early round defensive line picks. Greg Rousseau aside, you can say what you will about that. Really, I think will be is that future, at least in 2025, going to include, if a move is made, going to still include Gregory Rousseau or not? And I think that's the question, because I think in an ideal world, you'd love to be able to trade for Myles Garrett or Maxx Crosby and retain Gregory Rousseau's services for 2025, knowing that you probably will only have him for 2025. Or do you suck it up for that year, say, look, we're only going to have him for 1 year anyway, let's put him in the package to maybe reduce the draft capital it might take for us to acquire one of these guys? I'm kind of on the fence with that one, because I do think that if you had Rousseau for at least for 2025, plus one of these guys, plus AJ Epinesa, plus maybe a Javon Solomon in a draft pick, like, you could have a very formidable edge group, and have a potential really dominant group for one season at least, knowing that Rousseau will probably be gone after 2025.
Yeah, I mean, you love the idea of Myles Garrett and you love the idea of Maxx Crosby, and then you start to think, well, what do I have to pay for them? And all of that draft capital starts to come to mind. Multiple first round picks or a first round pick and a second round pick. Like, those are the type of things that it probably will take to lure these teams into trading these premier edge rushers that do not become available very often. To me, and I caught a lot of flack for this on social media, to me, a trade package will likely have to include Gregory Rousseau, despite them being, I think, a perfect pair, whether it's Myles Garrett and Gregory Rousseau or Maxx Crosby and Gregory Rousseau. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, you kind of mentioned it, money, right? Like, if you're going to bring in Myles Garrett, you're going to extend Myles Garrett. If you're going to bring in Maxx Crosby, you're going to extend Maxx Crosby. You're not paying Gregory Rousseau $18 to $22 million to play across from them. And then the second reason is draft capital, right? You don't want to give up too much draft capital to go and acquire a Myles Garrett or a Maxx Crosby. So maybe you look to throw in Gregory Rousseau to significantly decrease the amount of draft capital that you have to get up. Like, I'm looking at it like Groot, the 30th overall pick, and then maybe another pick would get you Myles Garrett. And I think just like maybe Groot and maybe even like a second and a fourth round pick could get you a Maxx Crosby, or Groot and a first round pick, like, but just that for like Crosby and another pick to sort of offset that first one, like a fourth rounder or a third rounder or something. So to me, if you throw in Gregory Rousseau to the deal, I like Gregory Rousseau. He's 25. He's still very young. He's still very productive. But at the end of the day, he's not Maxx Crosby. He's nowhere close to the same stratosphere as Maxx Crosby. And Myles Garrett is like a rung above that. So if that old sort of meme from Marvel, right? Like, they're asking Thanos, like, what did it cost, right? if the cost is Gregory Rousseau, I'm fine with that, to get one of these two guys in the fold.
Well, and I think we also have to remember that the cost may only be Gregory Rousseau for 2025, right? Because we don't know if the Bills are even going to be able to bring him back beyond 2025 with other extension candidates on the team as well, like Benford, like Terrell Bernard, Khalil Shakir, like there's a lot of guys that have justification potentially for an extension from the Bills. And I know Gregory Rousseau is in that short list that likely fans want to see extended beyond 2025, but if Brandon Beane in his heart of hearts um doesn't really have the true intention to give Gregory Rousseau an extension and have him in the future plan for the Bills beyond 2025, then you would probably make that move and put him in with that trade, because that really then only gives you this 1 year. So you either try to make that trade without him, pay more, have him for this 1 year, and try to really load up for 2025, knowing that maybe sacrifices your future a bit in 2026. But yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting.
And Sweet Spike comes in and says, Greg Thompson says it's all fiscally possible. Yeah, it is. But again, like, how many cans are you kicking down the road? Are you going to end up looking like the New Orleans Saints in 3 years?
And how many draft picks are you
if you make those, and how many draft picks are you giving up too? So all of these different scenarios need to be played out. Just because they can do it doesn't mean they should do it. Right. In terms of pairing Gregory Rousseau with one of these guys, again, go get Myles Garrett, go get Maxx Crosby. If you can pair him with Groot, great. If not, and it costs you Groot, I'm okay with that too, because these two guys are in their prime. I think we need that pass rush presence. Those are the type of difference makers on the defensive line that change games, right? Chris Jones level
and
defenders.
And I'll tell you, my preference would be to keep Groot for 2025, and whatever happens in 2026, be damned. I say Groot, Epinesa, Myles Garrett or Crosby, and then you're probably going to be cutting Von Miller in that scenario. And then it's Javon Solomon and maybe a guy you draft, right? So, look, I like the idea of that, but then you still have the problem, as we're going to talk about later in the show, of the interior of the defense.
Yeah.
So anyway, I love the idea of bringing Myles Garrett on board, or Maxx Crosby, but Myles Garrett, obviously, I like that idea a little bit more.
Some other news and notes from around the league regarding the Buffalo Bills. Nickel cornerbacks coach Scott Booker is leaving for the New England Patriots to rejoin Mike Vrabel, who he worked for in Tennessee. Assistant defensive line coach Matt Edwards is leaving for the defensive line coaching gig under Liam Cohen in Jacksonville. We are seeing team after team after team deny their assistants an opportunity to upgrade and go for a promotion, etc. The Buffalo Bills are not one of those teams. They let guys grow. They let guys move on to promotions. They don't hold people back. I think that goes a long way into building sort of the culture and climate the Buffalo Bills have built here. So kudos to Scott Booker to going with, Mike Vrabel, to someone he's more comfortable with. Kudos to Matt Edwards for that promotion. Speaking of coaches, one coach I think we wish would leave is Matthew Smiley, consistently one of the league's worst special teams coaches. And despite many options being available right now as staffs are shuffling league wide, Sean McDermott announced that he's going to learn from his mistakes, and he did a pretty good job, and that Matthew Smiley will be back in 2025. A rare non-Kansas City playoff L for the Buffalo Bills. You don't see them taking a lot of those outside of the Chiefs in the playoffs, but I'm speechless. I don't have anything to say other than it's just unfathomable. But what are your thoughts on the Buffalo Bills retaining Matthew Smiley as their special teams coordinator?
I mean, this is one of the few instances where you'd probably say that Bills fans are unanimously in agreement, right? We all love each other. We all love the Bills, but we very rarely agree on everything when it comes to this team, whether it's personnel decisions, coaching, players, whatever. This is one that seems that it's pretty universal among fans that we're scratching our heads with this one, like how he's still been retained. Good on the beat guys for asking about it. I think Brasky and a couple others asked. Matt Perino asked point blank, and yeah, they got the vote of confidence. Now things could change, obviously, but I just can't imagine a world where you're content with that when teams like the Broncos, for example, are released their special teams coordinator, and they have the number one special teams DVOA, and a guy like that is out there on the market.
Yeah.
Like, why is Matthew, like, how is that guy unemployed? And I don't know if he's been hired yet by anybody. And how is Matthew Smiley employed? It is a head scratcher. And I mean, I wouldn't say that it necessarily cost the Bills wins and losses in 2024, but it certainly made the job a lot more difficult on them in 2024 in certain scenarios. And I'm also not ready to give Matthew Smiley credit for, Tyler Bassett and Sam Martin's kicking, because they actually did have a good year, but the return game and coverage units were quite bad this year. And I think that's probably the biggest issue that fans had with the special teams. Not to mention like the fake punt coverages and like all the other stuff that comes along with the non-kicking side of special teams.
All right, before we get into our Senior and Shrine Bowl talk, a quick word from our sponsors over at Picasso's.
What's up, y'all? Khalil Shakir here. When I want Buffalo pizza, it's got to be Picasso's.
Picasso's.
Khalil Shakir. Your team, our pizza. Picasso's. This is Buffalo Pizza.
This episode is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza with 4 convenient locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Picasso's Pizza has been serving Buffalo's best pizza since 1980. Whether you're a local or across the country, you can enjoy their delicious pizza delivered fresh to your door. Visit picassospizza.net to place your order today. All right, let's get into it. Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, always a great time of year. Shared on social media this week, sort of our off-season outline through draft night. We have this Senior Bowl recap here tonight. We are peeking into free agency next week, and then we have the combine. We have the actual free agency window. We have our position by position draft previews. So a lot of stuff coming up here at the Air Raid Hour.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Today was I would say the first day that I spent hours upon hours in succession, kind of prepping some draft research and things of that nature. Before the season ended, it was kind of like a little bit here, a little bit there, but today really got into it. And yeah, like we said before, these next couple months, we're going to try to bring you as much good information on these prospects as we can, get your thoughts, and like you said, really focus in on the areas and positions of need for this Bills team.
Yeah, one thing that I want to personally do this offseason is I want to be a little bit more fluid and I want to be a little bit more targeted. I don't want us to use our time and energy doing full episodes breaking down, say, like offensive tackles when the Buffalo Bills do not have an apparent need at the position. They are literally 4 to 5 deep there with guys they seemingly like who are all under contract for a decent amount of term. So right now, the positions that we have outlined to do full shows on are wide receiver, edge rusher, interior defensive line, and cornerback. That could change depending on who we say sign or don't sign in free agency, or maybe, go after via trade. Wink, wink. So those sort of back half closer to the draft shows are a little bit fluid because obviously needs change. I think a couple of years ago, I remember we spent months and months and months talking about guards, and then guard was clearly not a need as we approached the draft. It was well, we spent all that time prepping and didn't need one. So I want to be a little bit more fluid and flexible this year. Those are the position groups I think that we are targeting right now, but obviously over time it'll change. Let's start this evening with wide receiver. The Buffalo Bills have under contract Khalil Shakir in the slot, Keon Coleman, who is slated to come back next year as the X. They have Curtis Samuel as sort of the Z and gadget guy. They also have KJ Hamler, Jalen Virgil, and Tyrell Shavers signed to futures deals. So a lot of bodies can be added. Pending UFAs include Mack Hollins, who's a nice, really inline, blocking wide receiver, a depth piece, a guy who really stepped up clutch for the Buffalo Bills this year. And obviously the trade acquisition at the deadline, Amari Cooper, who didn't really do much in his time here. He is a pending UFA as well. We discussed this a little bit last week. You would like to see Hollins back. You would like to see the Bills add a piece. Cooper, if he's back, this room likely becomes a little less of a need and a talking point. I think Virgils and Shavers are maybe low key two guys who they could be developing to replace a guy like Matt Collins in that depth special teams role. But I hope that's maybe for 2026 and not 2025. Looking at this group, I want Hollins back, and I want the Bills to go get themselves a true separator, preferably one who can separate from the boundary. What are your thoughts on the needs at this position?
Yeah, I would be a little shocked if they completely ran it back with everyone they had, meaning they re-signed Hollins, they re-signed Cooper. I just don't think the money is going to make sense to give Amari Cooper any kind of real term. Now, if it's something that's pretty team friendly, I could see them maybe trying to bring Amari Cooper back. The Bills obviously acknowledged at the trade deadline this past year that they needed to add a piece to that room, and they felt like Amari Cooper was that piece that they needed to add. But at the end of the day, the contributions were sparse, probably for what fans expected. He did make some pretty clutch catches and some nice catches for this team, but I just think the volume of what fans expected from him maybe wasn't there. I think at some points it was maybe, we're going to kind of bring in a guy to kind of take on what Stephon Diggs was for this team, but he's not going to demand the target share that a guy like Stephon Diggs did. And to kind of stay with that everybody eats mentality, it was a little bit more watered down with Amari Cooper. And so for those reasons, I don't necessarily think if the Bills want to stick to that philosophy that they should bring a guy like Amari Cooper back and invest the dollars in him. I would take Matt Collins back on a very favorable number if the Bills could, because I think he was great for this team. Good blocker, seemed to draw penalties, and did make his fair share of important plays, as well as kind of fourth, fifth wide receiver. And then for the Bills to go add a dynamic weapon in the draft that they can sort of pair with a rising, hopefully, Keon Coleman next year and have that young core really in place. So I'm in agreement with you kind of on the approach for this position.
Just somebody who can get defenses out of this cover one, this one high safety look that defensive coordinators seemingly love to throw at the Buffalo Bills. While everyone else is going too deep shell and trying to cover teams that way, teams have pivoted for some reason against the Buffalo Bills and played a lot of these single high safety looks. So I think the Bills need a guy who can be a true third level threat, open things up even, more for the running backs out of the backfield than we saw this year. I think Dalton Kincaid is a guy who could really use a guy to take something off the top so he can work the middle of the field. Dawson Knox, another really good tight end the Buffalo Bills have. So to me, a speedy boundary wide receiver who can take the top off, getting him the ball on a go route would be fun. Don't get me wrong, but it's just what that element can open up for everybody else, and to make sure that everybody else doesn't get too stale, that other teams don't catch up to what the Buffalo Bills were doing this year without that true deep threat.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, whether you want to call it a speedy boundary guy or I want speed on this offense, right? I want a speed element at the wide receiver position. Much talk about sort of the Keon Coleman, Xavier Worthy trade, whatever, right? Like the Bills got a guy that they wanted and thought would be a good fit for this offense last year in Keon Coleman, a guy that they hadn't had stylistically before. They really haven't had necessarily that speed downfield threat either. If you think about it, they've had guys like Gabriel Davis who wasn't necessarily a speed guy down the field, but a guy that could stride down the field and make plays. They had a guy like Isaiah McKenzie in the past who was speedy, but not really a down the field threat. He was more of a horizontal threat. So I want to add a speed element to this offense, and preferably a guy that can stretch the field vertically, because I do think the Bills have enough in the room to stretch the field horizontally with Samuel, with Shakir, with the tight ends, with Coleman. So I whether you want to call them boundaries, like I'm not so worried about that. I just want a guy that I know can get down the field, and then maybe you can use him in different situations, slot, boundary, whatever. But I do want a guy that can get down the field and to kind of take the top off this defense, or take the top off the defense.
No one had a better week in Mobile than somebody we touched on at the top of the show, and Jack Beck. What a story. He lost his brother Tiger in the horrific terrorist attacks in New Orleans the day before the Sugar Bowl. He caught the game-winning touchdown. He had a great week in Mobile. It was an emotional moment. I believe he was the MVP of the game as well. And his draft stock is absolutely through the roof. The Puka Nacua comps are everywhere on
Mm.
social media, but he's not going to be a guy that's on my list tonight of guys I want to talk about, because like we did at the top of this segment here, want to be more targeted with who we look for. And to me, if Mac Hollins leaves in free agency, okay, maybe we can have a conversation about a guy like Jack Bech. But if he doesn't, Jack Bech, what he does well is not, I think, what the Buffalo Bills are looking to add to this wide receiver room. It is speed. And those are the guys that I sort of have highlighted this evening here for my Senior Bowl list.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, the story of Jack Bech is awesome. And look, I mean, I think that, locker room fit, team culture fit, like he's certainly a fit, like for the Buffalo Bills and sort of what they stand for organizationally, and um, all of that makes sense to me. But at the end of the day, you also need to primarily, or you should primarily, be a fit on the football field. And look, with all that said, watch they go out and they'll go get him or something. But look, I mean, he had the fourth highest yards per reception of draft eligible wide receivers from this class, with at least 85 targets. So, like, he is a guy that does have a pretty high yards per catch average, and didn't necessarily see that in the game itself. But I do think that we'll see when it comes to the combine in Indianapolis what he runs. But it would be a little surprising if you went out there and saw him run a super fast 40 time. But play style, love him, but probably not on my short list, at least for right now.
Yeah, Dylan in the comment section mentions Matthew Golden. We'll talk about him on the Combine preview show. He wasn't at the Senior Bowl. So getting into it now, some of the prospects. Number one on my list is Tez Johnson out of Oregon. Now, Tez Johnson is 5'9", 156 pounds. That weight is obviously pretty concerning. That is like Tutu Atwell level skinny. But for Tez Johnson, it's the speed, right? This is the speed we're looking for. This is the separator we're looking for. It is game-changing speed. It is game-changing separation ability that you saw on display in Mobile from Tez Johnson. It's the kind of speed that defensive coordinators at the start of the week, they have to plan for. They have to account for if you're playing the Buffalo Bills and Tez Johnson is on your football team. He was creating consistent separation all week. He is an easy separator. He's number one in this class in yards per route run at 3.2 yards. He's number 4 in target rate versus man coverage in this class. Runs by guys, right? The Tank Dell comps were coming out in full force. Tez and Tank are actually really good friends, and they were texting all week. I saw a couple people saying his route running was Lad McConkey-ish, which might get some Bills fans excited. Somebody mentioned Rashid Shaheed in the comment section earlier. Maybe you can use a guy like Tez to get the top off of a defense like the Saints do with Shaheed, even though he isn't the biggest guy. And to me, the biggest selling point for Tez Johnson, maybe to the Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Bills like guys who have big games and big moments in college. Terrell Bernard and his big Sugar Bowl, Dalton Kincaid, his big Rose Bowl. Tez Johnson in the Big Ten championship game, 11 catches, 181 yards, and a touchdown versus the Penn State Nittany Lions. So we know Terry Pagula was watching.
Yeah, Terry Pagula was watching. I like I like Tez Johnson. My friend who's a Broncos fan texts me. He's like, I love Tez Johnson. I want him on my team. I'm like, he was like the darling, it felt like, of the practice. I do worry about the size. He did catch 81.2% of his targets, which was the second highest in the class for those with at least 85 targets. So he catches pretty much everything that's thrown at him. So you got to give him credit for that. Everyone is enamored by Tez Johnson right now, and rightfully so. I'm going to say this now early because, I'm sure people will start talking about him sooner rather than later. But for me, I think a guy that's going to rise up boards and that is ranked too low right now consensusly is Kyle Williams from Washington State. I think that at the Senior Bowl, Daniel Jeremiah praised his week of practice, had him in his top 12 standouts for the week. Obviously 14 touchdowns in 2024. We'll see what he runs in Indy. The question will be, what will his speed be? I think that could really potentially move his stock, but 5'10", 182, right? So the size isn't necessarily there for a guy like Kyle Williams, but for Tez Johnson, same thing, right? So what can he do?
Yeah.
He can separate. He's a polished route runner, 4th highest average depth of target against man coverage, with wide receivers who have at least 30 man coverage targets. And he had the highest yak per reception of anyone in this class with at least 85 targets at 8.4 yards. So I'm a big Kyle Williams fan as of right now in the process, and I could see him starting to rise up here pretty soon.
Yeah, he had a big Holiday Bowl against the Syracuse Orange as well. I mean, I've actually seen him play live a couple of times living out here out west, and Kyle Williams is a really good football player. Pops Mafia comes in and says, "Isn't height a question for Johnson?" Yeah, 5'9",
Same for Williams,
156. Same for Williams as well. And someone says Shaheed and Dell are never healthy. Yeah, it's not like these guys don't come without their pitfalls, right? Someone mentioned, where was it? The kid from Stanford. He's fast. I don't think he's fast. I think he's more of a strider than a speed guy. Almayor. I think he reminds me a lot of Gabriel Davis. So to me, I'm kind of out on him. But again, if Mac Hollins doesn't get re-signed, he's a guy who gets after it in the run game. Reminds me a lot of Gabe Davis. Maybe the Buffalo Bills see something they like in the kid out of Stanford. But the next name I have on my list, if you're looking for a little bit more size, is Jalen Royals out of Utah State, 5'11", 210, reported to run in the 4.3s. He's a former track guy. He was pacing for 1,400 yards, 90-plus catches before his injury this year, and he didn't really have the best quarterback play in the world there at Utah State. It was noted all week from a number of different draft guys who were on hand just how smooth he was in and out of his breaks in 1v1s, his ability to run crisp routes. This is a guy I think who can be a deep threat, but he can also win at all 3 levels. Sam Monson, formerly of PFF, now of the 33rd team, talked about just everyone wants to talk about how some of these guys in Mobile are running these TikTok routes, these routes that you'll never actually be able to run in a game. They're these super gimmicky routes. That wasn't exactly what Jalen Royals was doing. He was very subtle. He wasn't gimmicky. And what he was doing was repeatable in a game, unlike maybe some of the other guys who were taking advantage of the fact that it's a 1v1 and it heavily favors the wide receivers in those situations. But to me, with Jalen Royals, former track guy, projected to run the 4.3s, that speed, but more importantly, that ability as he is a accelerator and a decelerator to manipulate that speed. I think he might run slower than people think. But being that accelerator, being able to control that speed, I wouldn't mind Jalen Royals. He's definitely a guy I had to do a little bit more work on, but impressed me in Mobile.
Yeah, Jalen Royals, I've seen him in a lot of mock drafts for the Bills, some of these early mock drafts. A fan of his. I think he's a complete player. Like you said, he's going to run, I think, a pretty decent time. And I think that you could see like his name pop up a lot more once the combine comes through. So I do like Jalen Royals right now, early in the process. People in the comment section mentioning the Iowa State guys, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Noel. I like the idea of Jaden Higgins. Again, I don't think he's going to be a fast guy, time at the combine. And if we're looking for like down the field threats, he is a down the field threat, but I agree. I would say he is more of a bigger body down the field threat, a Gabe Davis, maybe a little bit bulkier than Davis, but he was also reportedly one of the best wide receivers at practice all week, and obviously caught the touchdown in the game. 4th best contested catch percentage versus man coverage for draft eligible wide receivers with at least 30 man coverage targets. He had the best PFF receiving grade and 2nd best drop grade of anyone in the class with at least 85 targets. The question is he too similar to a guy like Keon Coleman for us? And he played mostly on the boundary, but he did have about 30% slot snaps as well. So I do like Jaden Higgins. He's a guy for me. Again, I think more maybe if the Bills don't bring back Mac Hollins, I could see them being interested in a guy like that.
There were a lot of guys. This is not a very deep wide receiver class, and there were some guys that shined in Mobile, and I'm like, dang it, why do they have to be that type of receiver? Jaden Higgins is one of them, maybe too similar to Keon Coleman, more of a strider and a boundary guy with some size, more so than a speed separator. Jalen Noel, his teammate at Iowa State, reminds me a lot of Khalil Shakir. He's a fun slot option. Xavier Restrepo from Miami, another guy. He's a bigger slot option, but he's still a slot option. Another guy who reminds me a little bit of Khalil Shakir. So some of the best wide receivers, just to me, looking at that fit, if the Bills bring Matt Collins back, which I think they will, you're looking for that speed separator. Some of these names that really had a good week, I just don't know. One guy I think I have is in my early running to be like my Javon Baker of this year, in terms of like my draft crush, who I won't shut the F up about in the pre-draft process. And that's Ty Felton out of Maryland. 6 foot 186. He's expected to run in the 4.3s. He's a true Z receiver, right? Boundary receiver with a thinner frame. He runs a lot of outside verticals, a lot of deep overs. He's used in the screen game a lot at Maryland on his tape. He went for 96, 1,124 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2024. He was number 3 in target rate versus man coverage in this class. He's got a combo of sort of being able to go vertical. He's got really good ball tracking ability. To me, that fills a need for the Buffalo Bills. He reminds me a little bit of Emmanuel Sanders, who is someone that Brandon Beane loved and wanted for years and years and years before he finally got him towards the tail end of his career. And I saw one person say some taller Jordan Addison vibes for Ty Felton. Yeah. So I'm a really big fan of Ty Felton out of Maryland.
I like Ty Felton. I think, he measured 6'2", 181, I think at the Senior Bowl, something like that. Those might not be the exact. I think that's what I saw. But he had the second most targets of all eligible wide receivers, draft eligible wide receivers in 24, 143 targets. You mentioned the 96 passes caught, had the 4th most yak in the class for those with at least 85 targets, as you would expect. Spent about 30% of his time in the slot. So you mentioned the versatility. So he's got some versatility there. The one concern I guess I would have with him is the hands, right? He had some drops problems, not the best hand catcher of the football, but 143 targets and 96 catches. He caught plenty of footballs. So that's the one thing that you would say about Ty Felton. I do love him. Is how sure-handed is he? And again, that was a question about guys like Javon Baker as well last year. So we'll see.
One last guy I wanted to talk about, not a Senior Bowl guy, but a Shrine Bowl guy. And I really wasn't too impressed with the Shrine Bowl receivers this year. Cornerbacks were consistently better than the receivers in Frisco this year, which is never a good thing. But I've always liked Ricky White out of UNLV, 6'1", 190. He's a linearly explosive athlete. He's a vertical guy. He can give vertical straight line speed. He's a guy who's got a really good ball tracking ability. He plays all 4 phases of special teams, which is something I think the Buffalo Bills will like. Again, quiet Shrine Bowl week, but I really like Ricky White, and I will probably be going to bat for him over the course of the pre-draft process as well. Any other receivers you want to talk about before we get into edge rushers?
I kind of hit him. I mean, I mentioned Kyle Williams, Royals, Higgins, Felton. I mean, those are probably the ones for now. There's a couple others that aren't really like burners per se. Kobe Hudson's interesting to me from UCF, but yeah, we can move on for now.
Yeah, and Nabil comes in and says Jackson Meeks. I liked Jackson Meeks. He was one of the few guys who had a good week at the Shrine, but again, it'll be really interesting to see at the combine, like what he runs. Like, is he going to be a vertical guy? Because to me, he's more of a powerful sort of like Jaden Higgins, like Strider type. So I like Jackson Meeks, don't get me wrong. But again, right now at this stage in the pre-draft process, what he provides to a football team, not the box I'm looking to check. And again, that can change over the course of the offseason. But on to edge rusher now. The Buffalo Bills have Gregory Rousseau under contract, AJ Epinesa, Javon Solomon, and Von Miller. Pending free agents include Dwayne Smoot and Casey Toohill. I'm not really sure what Kingsley Jonathan is. I looked. Bills PR did not list him as signing a futures deal, so I assume Kingsley Jonathan is probably heading towards unrestricted free agency as well. Von Miller's contract, that's the big question. If the Buffalo Bills were to flat out release him before June 1st, they'd be eating $15 million this year and saving $8 million, but then all that money would come off the books in 2026. 6. If they were to post June 1st release him, which means they can't spend the money until after June 1st when free agency is over, but maybe they trade for a guy like, Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby, and then wait until after June 1st to give him an extension. The dead cap hit in 2025 for Von Miller would be $6 million, $9 million next season, and it would save the Buffalo Bills almost $17.5 million. To me, it's pretty simple. The Bills need to either lock up Gregory Rousseau and get younger and more impactful across from him, or maybe they need to use Groot as a trade piece to go out and get a big fish and then build around that big fish. But I don't expect Von Miller back, and I think the Buffalo Bills need to go out and look for some pass rushers this offseason.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing, right? With the free agent class not necessarily being fantastic, I think really the only my prediction, and I could be totally wrong, right? It's just a prediction, but my prediction would be that the Bills do cut Von Miller before June 1st. Just take the savings that you can get now from cutting him. I know it's not the 17 in 2025 cap relief, but that also saves you $9 million against the cap in 2026. And I think that's really important, especially as the Bills think about giving extensions to guys like possibly Terrell Bernard or Christian Benford, or even Gregory Rousseau for that matter. I don't think the Bills want to have a ton of dead money sitting on their books in 2026. I'd cut Von Miller before June 1st. I'd cut him, pretty much right away, probably, unless something weird happens and you can make a trade. And for some reason, a trade for Myles Garrett and Maxx Crosby is the really only accounting reason that would really stop you from needing to cut him before June 1st if you needed that additional savings, let's say for an extension. But I mean, for me, I don't want to kick that can down the road necessarily. I'd cut him. You don't get the 17 in 2025, but you do get that 9 dead cap off your books in 2026, which I think is going to be important for the future of this team. So yeah, I'm cutting him before June 1st, unless for some reason he agrees to some other new restructure or pay cut or something that he did last year. But I'm cutting him, and I might make an effort, honestly, to bring back Dwayne Smoot at a decent number if the Bills are able to do that as a little bit of a maybe pre-free agency insurance or free agency insurance for that.
Looking to the Senior Bowl, this might not be the deepest draft overall, but there are certainly some positions in which this class is absolutely loaded, and one of them is edge rusher. I mean, thinking back last year to all the defensive ends that were in Mobile that I was trying to sell myself on, and then looking at these guys, and I'm like, I don't need to sell myself on any of these guys. I like all of these guys. Like, I have a list a mile long here of some edge rushers, quite a list of names we're about to go through. And honestly, many of them we won't even get to until the combine because they weren't even in Mobile. So
right.
A really, really good edge rusher class this year. And the Buffalo Bills, I think, unless they make one of those big trades and they have Groot on one side and Myles Garrett on another and AJ Panessa, and Javon Solomon, unless they make that kind of move, I would really like the Buffalo Bills to snag one of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for Bean to keep taking swings at edge early, right? I mean, these are potentially game-wrecking type of guys that you are trying to go after. I'm not saying they're Myles Garrett or Maxx Crosby, but you need to probably keep swinging if you're Brandon Bean and you're not able to get a trade for Maxx Crosby or Myles Garrett. You need to swing probably on one of these guys, potentially as early as the first round, whether it's Mike Green or someone like that. I don't think he's going to make it to the Bills, obviously, at 30.
That's the thing. Two guys, Mike Green and Shamar Stewart, who I like. I don't no longer think are options for the Buffalo Bills at pick 30.
They're not, probably, but then you got I can never say his name, Izaraku from BC, who size-wise has not necessarily been the guy that the Bills would go after, but without Von Miller, this guy who's 6'2", 247, led this edge class in
34.5-inch arms.
Yep, led this edge class in quarterback hits in 2024, had 14 sacks in 2024, which was tied for third most in the class. He is a pass rushing specialist from a good BC pro style program and defense that if you were going to replace Von Miller, that's about the range where you would do it maybe at pick 30 for a guy like that, who, by the way, looked like had a good week of practice as well at the Senior Bowl. And if you are trying to, again, we talked about this as we did with Javon Solomon a year ago as being the understudy Devon Miller. Like, you have Epinesa and Rousseau. Like, you need a pass rusher that can get to the quarterback. This guy can get to the quarterback.
Yeah, Nabeel comes in and says Donovan is very Nick Benito, and we loved Nick Benito a couple of years ago now. It was when we finally got a chance to talk about those edge rushers because we had Vaughn. We had never talked about them for years and years and years, and we're like, oh my gosh, we can talk about the bendy guys now. Like, we can talk about like the skinnier bendy guys now that we have Vaughn. But yeah, Donovan Izaraku out of Boston College, 6'2", 248, 34.5-inch arms. Just some of the still images of the bend that he would get.
Yeah.
It's just insane. It's just insane. And then you mentioned some of his college production, but a full picture, 14 sacks, 60 pressures, 20 hits, 26 hurries, and 22-4. Man is an animal. I want to talk about these two guys real quick, just because I'm not going to be able to probably talk about them for too much longer, and I love them. Mike Green from Marshall, 6'3", 251, 32-inch arms, only 8-inch hands. People are starting to pull out the Will Anderson comps for him and the Nolan Smith comps for him. So he's probably not making it to the Buffalo Bills at 30. He left early. He dominated all week. Plenty of pass rush moves, bendy, explosive, high motor, former wrestler. So his hand usage is just powerful and incredible. 17 sacks, led the NCAA, 63 pressures, third in the NCAA. Despite low percentile stature, he is good against the run, 49 run stops, which was first in college football last year, 94% run stop percentage, which was 90th percentile. Like, that dude might have earned himself like a top 10 pick, like
10 to 15, I think. Yeah,
I think we're getting that lofty for Mike Green. And then Shamar Stewart, where have you been all my life? Shamar Stewart, 6'5", 281, 34.5-inch arms.
He's going to test so well.
Oh God.
Yeah.
He dominated. Really nice rushes around the edge, for a strip sack. That was his highlight of the week. No one that size should have that type of exploding speed off the line of scrimmage, that type of bend, that type of flexibility. I wanted to comp him Keon White, but that might be like disrespectful to him at this point, because for his size, even though size-wise he's similar to Keon White, I think he's a lot more athletic than Keon White, which is crazy. Yep. And he performed so well, he left early too. So those two are off the board. Those two are pipe dreams.
They might be pipe dreams, and man, like, I can't believe a guy that big can move like that. I mean, look, if you're a Bills fan and you are clamoring for defensive line help, you enjoyed what you saw the practice week at Mobile, right? The defensive line just absolutely dominated in practices, in the game. So you're encouraged by if you like some of these Senior Bowl guys, as to what you saw in practice and in the game. I mean, I know he's not necessarily on your list, but Jared Ivey was a guy that popped to me when I started digging into him. He's a little bit bigger as well. I kind of jokingly said online today that, like, he could be your Greg Rousseau replacement in 2026, 6'6", 285, fifth best pass rush grade at edge from this class with at least 450 defensive snaps. That translated into 8 sacks this past year, had 8 sacks as well in 2023, had 3 batted balls this year. He's only one of 5 edge players in the class with at least 450 snaps that had a 90 plus pass rush grade and 80 plus run defense grade from the edge in 2024 per PFF. So one of only 5 guys for that. So Jared Ivey, a guy that's becoming a favorite of mine early on in the process.
And how about his running mate there, Princely Umamilian, coming in at like 260 plus, which was really good for him. I think both those Ole Miss edge rushers are ones the Buffalo Bills should consider. A name that came up a couple of times in the comment section. I got to do some more deep dives on Landon Jackson out of Arkansas. Obviously, at the size he's at, let me just Google it real quick.
6'7", 280 is what I saw.
He is a big boy, right? And he had a sack in the game.
Strip sack.
I have some concerns about his ability to leverage at that height and that size and some things like that. So I'll have to do some more digging into Landon Jackson before I can make it a definitive statement, but I'm not as high on him as I know some people are. I like Kyle Kennard out of South Carolina. Didn't really hear too much about him this week, although he was on the roster. The other guy that I heard a lot about was Oluwafemi Oladejo out of UCLA.
Yeah, I think he had 2 sacks, didn't he, in the game? I'm pretty sure.
People are saying he could be this year's Jalix Hunt, right? 6'2", 261, 33.5-inch arms. He was an off-ball linebacker at Cal before transferring to UCLA and becoming an edge rusher. So he's raw. He hasn't played at the position very long, but he's got the traits. He's got the frame. He's twitchy, solid run defender. He had 57 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, and 4.5 sacks in 2024. And he also won the Good Guy Award that they give out every year at the Senior Bowl for just like being a nice person, right? And like being a good guy. So, you know, that's something the Buffalo Bills could vibe with how much they care about culture and things of that nature. Any other Senior Bowl defensive ends you wanted to touch on? And there's one Shrine Bowl guy in particular I wanted to sort of note here.
I don't know whether should I call him Mr. Blue Label, Johnny Walker Jr. from Missouri.
Missouri, he had a big game.
Yeah, 6'3", 255. He's one of only 4 players in this class that had at least 34 hurries and 10 sacks on the season. For those with at least 450 snaps, he had a nice game. He's another guy I think who's rated maybe a little too low now in current boards that you'll start to see rising up. So I would say out of the two groups we've reviewed so far, I think Kyle Williams and Johnny Walker respectively are too low for where they're ranked right now. And I think you could see both of them rise up.
Another big Shrine Bowl was Roberts from SMU, but he came in at like 280 and people are talking about him as possibly a 3-tech. There was the Central Arkansas defensive end, had a big week.
Yeah.
Was getting what's his name again? I'm blanking on his name, but he was
David Walker.
Some Melvin Ingram comps with the way he was such a kind of a power player. Again, there's just so many that I feel guilty that I didn't put them all on my list, but like there was only so many I could get to. Tyler Batty out of BYU at the Shrine Bowl. I thought he had a really good week. He's an older player. Obviously, BYU went on his Mormon mission. He's married, right? So he's a little bit older of a player, but 6'3", 270, 32.5-inch arms. He only had 2 sacks in 2024, but he had 42 pressures, 29 hurries, and 11 quarterback hits. So Tyler Batty, if you're looking for sort of a power player at the edge rusher position, maybe like a Sam Hubbard type, that is maybe someone you could consider who might be around in round 4, all right, or round 5 of this year's draft. So Batty from BYU is a guy that I liked as well. All right, let's get to the defensive interior. And again, my list is disgusting here of all the dudes I want to talk about. And I have another favorite guy who I might be pounding the table for at pick 30. And I didn't think I'd be pounding the table for him because he weighs less than 315 pounds. I didn't think I would be pounding the table for anyone less than 315, but I might be for this guy that I'm going to talk about in a little bit here. But we have Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Dwayne Carter under contract. We have Zion Logue signed to a futures deal. Free agents include Austin Johnson, Jordan Phillips, Quentin Jefferson. I would like to see a revamp here of the 1-tech position, at least 2 real power players added, but I would also settle for just 2 guys here, right? Daquan Jones, it's going to be hard to move off of contractually, but let's make him more of a rotational guy and let's get him some more beef up front to rotate with, to take some pressure off of Ed Oliver. That's my thoughts at the defensive tackle position. I want to see 2 significant or relatively significant investments here.
Yeah, I agree. Because if you think about it, like your 3 mainstays in theory going into the season are going to be Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, and Dwayne Carter, right? And then whatever you do with bringing maybe some of those bottom of the barrel guys back, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but like you really need to have a succession plan for Daquan Jones past 2025, and that succession plan maybe starts as early as 2025 with the rotation, as you mentioned, and then Dwayne Carter needs to get more reps in 2025 as well. So the Bills with the rotation that they like to do with those DTs, they had to bring in Jordan Phillips off the Cowboy, and they had to bring in Quentin Jefferson. Like they had to bring in these guys. Like I agree with you. Make 2 investments here. It seems like we talk about sort of the 1-tech investment almost every year, and I did like that they did invest in Dwayne Carter last year. Don't get me wrong, but I think you need to invest a little bit more in the interior. And I think the Bills realize, hopefully Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott realize like it's time for a little bit more of a youth movement here on the interior. So I'm with you. I want to see 2 investments as well.
I'm going to share a name, and this is the guy I think I'm going to pound the table for at 30. And I don't care if some people might think it's too early. I don't think people are going to be talking about this. It's too early for this guy at pick number 30. And we're going to get to Kenneth Grant, and we're going to get to Deion Walker, because I know people love to talk about the Beefy Boys, and we're going to talk about the Beefy Boys in a minute. But some love for the Mac guy here. Darius Alexander out of Toledo, 6'3.5", 304, 34-inch arms. His tape matches what people saw at the Senior Bowl. He was winning inside and out. You saw a couple of reps where he was on the edge beating Josh Connerly, who might be the first offensive tackle off the board, 1v1. He just has a great get off. He has great hand usage. He by far, I think, had one of the better weeks in Mobile of all interior defensive linemen. And people were, listen, knock on wood, right? I'm not saying he's going to be this guy, but people were saying like, yeah, there's a couple of reps where it's like, was that Chris Jones? No, that was Darius Alexander. So to me, I think Darius Alexander could be in play late round 1, pick number 30. Whereas before the Senior Bowl week, most people would have thought of him as maybe a day 2 guy or even a day 3 guy.
Yeah, he's definitely on my list as well. Second best PFF defensive grade for all interior defensive linemen in the class for those with at least 390 defensive snaps. Third best run defense grade of all IDLs of 2025 draft eligible players. 10th most stops, which is basically PFF's stat for plays that result in negative outcome for the offense of all draft eligible interior defensive linemen. So a lot of the metrics and analytics point to him being a really solid run defender. And that's something that, look, we really need that right on this defense. So I'm with you on Darius Alexander. He's certainly a guy that I don't know if I'm ready to go first round yet on him, but I could use one of your second round picks on him. I would be okay with that.
Let's get to the beef, because I know a lot of people want to talk to the beef, and I have a beef with Jim Nagy because I have no idea how this guy wasn't a Senior Bowl invite, but that's Kenneth Grant out of Michigan, 6'3", 342, 33-inch arms. He had 8 sacks, 50 pressures, 39 run stops over the past 2 seasons. You don't see a guy that athletic and that quick at Kenneth Grant's size. He's raw. You're sort of betting on the traits and the development. He did sort of prosper from getting to play next to Mason Graham for a couple of years, but this guy is a self-described space eater, and that would be Ed Oliver's best friend, a guy like Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, I like Kenneth Grant. He's a big boy, so I don't know if that's something the Bills would go for. Like, we've been clamoring for this for a number of years. I can think back to, drafts from many moons ago where we were clamoring for big dudes. Last year it was Tavondre Sweat. Like, maybe this year it's Kenneth Grant and Deion Walker. But look, we'll ask the question, right? If the Bills willing to maybe change their philosophy a bit on the interior defensive line, or are they going to kind of keep running it back with the same archetypes that they've gone with? If they are willing to change a little bit, then Kenneth Grant becomes really interesting to me. 11th best run defending grade of draft eligible IDL. I mean, he's certainly a guy that I would be very open to adding to this unit. I just wonder if I think it would take a little bit of not a lot, but a little bit of a change in philosophy for the Bills to go after a guy like that.
And then you got Deion Walker out of Kentucky, absolute specimen, 6'7", which is 100 percentile for defensive tackles, 353 pounds, 100 percentile for defensive tackles, 34.5-inch arms, 88th percentile for defensive tackles, 10.6-inch hands, 88th percentile. This is a stretch. But people are like, well, will the Bills have interest in a guy like Deion Walker? They've visited Kentucky a couple of times, number one. And they showed some interest in Gervon Dexter a couple of years ago. Now, Gervon Dexter is 40 pounds lighter, but he's sort of like that taller defensive tackle who was kind of raw, was kind of a project. I think he's developing pretty well there in Chicago. So kind of a stretch there, but he was a top 30 pick for the Buffalo Bills. So I don't think it's out of this world to consider the Buffalo Bills might be considering a guy like Deion Walker and a sort of shift in the type of defensive tackles they pursue. 97 pressures, 15 sacks, 70 run stops in his 3 seasons at Kentucky. He aligned everywhere from the nose tackle all the way out to the edge. The biggest criticism, and he does have a lot of people who are not the biggest fans of Deion Walker, pad level, plays too high, which is a concern for a guy who's 6'7". So if you believe in your coaching staff enough to work on that and fix that at the pro level, you are probably going to be very high on that ball of clay in Deion Walker. If you think he is what he is and there's no teaching that dog a new trick, you're probably going to be out on a guy like Deion Walker.
Yeah, and I think right now he's kind of settled in to that sort of appropriate range as like borderline niche guy, borderline guy that maybe people see as something they can do more with. He is a bit of a an all-around player, right? He had 4 sacks, 3 batted balls, and like he's a very interesting prospect, and probably, ranked probably right inside maybe the top 100 overall prospects right now. So that kind of puts him sort of on that sort of fringe day 2, I would say, range. But it all takes is one team, right? So really interesting player.
A guy who I thought the Buffalo Bills could have a chance at pick 30. They might not have a chance anymore. Walter Nolan out of Ole Miss.
I like
He's probably
him a lot.
the second biggest winner out of Mobile along the interior defensive line. 6'3", 293, 33-inch arms. Yes, sub 300 pounds. I get it. His comps are all over the board. Ben Fennell said his notes on Walter Nolan were very similar to his notes in 2013 on Sheldon Richardson. I'll take prime Sheldon Richardson on Buffalo Bills, right? Jordan Reed says a lot of Ed Oliver to his game. That might scare some Bills fans, but Brett Coleman said shades of Jalen Carter. That might excite some Bills fans. This guy is twitchy. He's powerful. He's coordinated. He's got penetrating.
Had a lot of good players, man.
Dude, they're loaded. They might have been the best team talent-wise. They might have been the best team in college football this year.
Yeah, they had a ton of good players.
Twitchy, powerful, coordinated, penetrating traits. Needs work with hand usage and diversifying his pass rush plan. So he still is a little bit of a ball of clay, but 72 run stops over the course of his college career. Only 5 missed tackles. So he's a pretty good run defender. 67 pressures, 14 sacks. Walter Nolan might not be on the board at pick 30 for the Buffalo Bills, but if he is, you should consider it.
Yeah, you should consider it. I mean, how about another Shrine guy, CJ West, that was mentioned in the comments section?
Yes.
Eighth best run defense grade of all IDL in the class, 6'2", 317. So a little bit bigger. He's kind of in that Daquan Jones archetype right there, right? Daquan Jones, I believe, 6'2", 325 or 320. So right there, CJ West, I think, I can't remember who was in the comment section mentioned him, but a Shrine guy that I liked.
There were 3 guys from the Shrine Bowl that I really liked. Number 1, I already mentioned, was Kenneth Grant. I don't even think Kenneth Grant worked out. I think he just interviewed. But CJ West out of Indiana, my notes on him, 6'1", 315, 31.5-inch arms, Kent State transfer. He instantly made Indiana's defense a top run defending unit. Like, he stepped on campus and just made them a legitimate unit. One thing that they weren't the year previous. Versatile. He's taken reps at 3-tech and nose tackle. I think the Bills will like that. There's a craftiness to his game, an array of pass rush moves, and a plan. Mike Renner was speaking with CBS Sports, and he just said, like, the guy looked too good to be in Frisco. He should have been in Mobile. So that's the type of talent that CJ West is. The comp that Mike Renner had for him was Dalvin Tomlinson. Not overly flashy, but just solid in run defense and pass rush. So again, like, if he could be like a Dalvin Tomlinson type, I'll take that. And then the other guy at the Shrine Bowl, right? I think most Bills fans will say it's time for the Buffalo Bills to move on from Jordan Phillips. But I also think nobody
Jordan Phillips.
Nobody wants to hurt Brother Bill's feelings. So, like, Brother Bill, can we offer you a new Jordan Phillips? Because at the Shrine Bowl, you have another Jordan Phillips out of Maryland who plays defensive tackle, 6'1", 318 pounds, 32-inch arms, only 20 years old. So he's raw, but he is just rocked up. Like, they brought him pads and he like barely fit into the pads that they brought him. He's got defined muscle, just an absolute specimen. 10.5% pass rush win rate in 2024. Powerful hands, former wrestler, former weightlifter. So he's checking some boxes there. He understands leverage. Again, raw, right? This is a guy who, if he went back to college or hit the transfer portal and went somewhere else, we could be talking about him as a first round pick in 2026. So if you get him on day 2 or even day 3, that could be a legitimate bargain. He referred to himself at the Shrine Bowl as a homebody. He prefers to stay home and just watch film. He said he was 20 going on 50 that way. I think that's something the Buffalo Bills might appreciate. A guy who doesn't like to go out and party, right? A guy who likes to stay home and watch film. He said one of his favorite watches is Keanu Benton. Man after my own heart, watching Keanu Benton.
We liked him.
Right. We loved him in the pre-draft process.
Yeah, we liked him.
And at the Shrine Bowl, I guess there were reports that, like, after every rep, he would just stare guys down. Like, so he's really intense too. So I'm a big fan of Jordan Phillips. Get him a coat. Give him a winter coat.
Yeah, and like, hey, you could go all Maryland, go Ty Felton and Jordan Phillips here.
There we go.
Draft, right?
Who needs Ole Miss when you got Maryland? Another guy who left early but had a really good week. He's a guy who The NFL Stock Exchange podcast just mocked to the Buffalo Bills in round 2, which I think at this point might be a steal. But again, it's a loaded class. Things change. I think he's going to have a big combine. Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee, 6'1", 295, kind of the Walter Nolan build, 33-inch arms, 11-inch hands. Like, just for reference here, the only hands in the NFL bigger than Omar Norman Lott's in the mock draftable database, DeForest Buckner, Gregory Rousseau, JJ Watt, and Cam Jordan. Like, that's pretty good. That dude's probably got some grip strength. He's quick, he's twitchy, he's powerful. He was bowling linemen back. His get off was nuts in the, I think, 2 days he was there in Mobile before he left with an injury. He moves the pocket. People were comparing his game to Byron Murphy's. So Omar Norman Lott out of Tennessee is, dude, we got to get a defensive tackle. We got to get one. There's so many good ones.
And he's one where, like, this is clearly where, like, the PFF grading, it doesn't match up with what you're seeing on the game, right? Because watching a couple of the scouting clips that I saw today, like, very good at shedding blockers, was double teamed a lot, was very powerful, like with the hands, as you mentioned. I liked his movement sort of in the pocket area as well, trying to get to the quarterback. He didn't get fooled a lot by quarterback movement. He was very deliberate in getting as close as he could to the quarterback. So I'm a fan of his. Sort of at first glance, I was like, not sure. But then the more I kind of looked into it, the more he certainly growed on me. And I like the size as well, because he's, 6'3", 315. So definitely a fan of his for now.
Couple other guys. We got to get a Florida State guy in here for our guy, Casey Reed. Joshua Farmer, 6'2", 314, 35-plus-inch arms, 10-inch hands, large, powerful frame with requisite mass to two-gap, flashes explosion quickness necessary to penetrate as a pass rusher, shows the ability to anchor down, but his base doesn't consistently hold up. So he does have some things he needs to work on. Joshua Farmer, that is. He's got like a Sebastian.
Six sacks from the interior last year. Pretty
Sebastian
good.
Joseph Day type of build to me, which is what I really like with Joshua Farmer. And then got to make our guy Randy Hardman happy. How about TJ Sanders out of South Carolina? I don't know how much on the Bills board he's going to be, 6'4", 284, but 33-inch arms, speed to power was incredible this week in Mobile. 60 pressures, 54 run stops his last 2 seasons in South Carolina. Maybe not Bills.
He's the guy that got better every year too.
Yeah,
he got better every. Like my brother-in-law's a Gamecock, and he's always talking to me about, like, these guys. And I always talk to him about the NFL because he's not an NFL guy. And I'm like, TJ Sanders, he's like followed him since day one. And he's like, every year this guy's gotten better. And so that's what I like to hear from some of these guys too, where you're like, I'm not sure, but an ascending player, I would say.
All right, so we got to stop talking about the big fatties. We got to move to the defensive backfield and talk about some cornerbacks. For the Buffalo Bills, they got Christian Benford, Taron Johnson, Jamarcus Ingram, Cam Lewis, Kyer Elam, Takori Couch, and Daquan Hardy under contract next year. Rasul Douglas is an unrestricted free agent. To me, boundary corner is probably a pretty big need here. Obviously, we could re-sign Rasul Douglas, and then it's a different conversation. I think Kyer Elam is going to get traded this offseason to a place to give him just a chance somewhere else. I think there's going to be a divorce between the Bills and Elam this offseason. So for me, I got my eyes on corners because I think the Bills might need 1 or 2 of them, especially on the boundary.
This is one where you're like, hey, I want 2 investments in the interior defensive line. You might have to make 2 investments at boundary corner, right? Because it's going to be Jamarcus Ingram and it's going to be Christian Benford if the Bills don't bring back Rasul Douglas, and if Kyer Elam isn't in the future plans for this team, whether it's via trade or otherwise. So I think this is one position, again, where it wouldn't surprise me if it was an early investment and a multiple investment in this draft.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of these corners. And there's a nice little pool of corners in the late first to early to second round, or day 2 type of guys. And I want to hitch my wagon early to Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky. He was one of my favorites this week in Mobile. 5'11", 179, 31-inch arms. He was just a competitor all week. Field Yates called him the best man-to-man corner. Real twitched up guy. 5 picks in 2023, so he's got the ball skills, 6 interceptions, 8 pass breakups, over 20 career starts at Kentucky. He run fits really well too. Only 8% missed tackle rate in 2023 from the boundary. I think Maxwell Hairston could be a sleeper at pick 30 as well. I'm sort of maybe getting a little too ahead of myself here, but I'm calling a few guys sleepers here at 30. I think Maxwell Hairston might be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, he got picked on a little bit during the actual game, but in practice, the reporting was really
Mhm.
strong on him. I like Maxwell Hairston, another Kentucky guy. But I'm going back to Ole Miss again. Trey
Yeah,
Amos.
Trey Amos,
I
yes.
mean, I just I was going through this whole list and I just kept coming back to him. 6'1", 190, certainly an archetype fit for the Bills.
Mhm.
10 pass breakups in 2024, which was tied for second of all the draft eligible corners. 14th best, what they do calculate NFL passer rating allowed on PFF, 14th best of those with 500 defensive snaps. And he's pretty evenly split grade wise between zone and man. So I know there were some issues about maybe some of his eye discipline, but man, he's someone I really like, and he's a really willing and good run defender too as well. So
Mhm.
um, Trey Amos is a guy that's certainly on my early radar. Only him and Jahdae Barron had defense and coverage grades of 85 plus and run defense grades of 80 plus in
Yeah.
2024. It was him and Barron were the only two guys.
Dylan in the comment section mentions Jahdae Barron. Somebody's mentioned Benjamin Morrison. People are talking about Tyreek Williams. Trust me, guys, we're going to get to all of those guys.
Just Senior Bowl today, though. Just Senior Bowl.
Combine week. So we're sticking to Senior Bowl, guys. So don't be offended. If you want to talk about those guys, we're going to talk about them today. We got plenty of time this offseason. We're not going to revert back to COVID air raid hour and be doing these 3.5 hour shows. We got families that need us here. But Trey Amos, 54.5 passer rating in 2024 when targeted, 10 pass breakups, 3 interceptions. Nick Saban recruit to Bama and then transferred to UL Lafayette before going back to Ole Miss. So really big fan of his. I think Azari Thomas, Florida State, another Florida State guy, Casey Reed, 6'1", 89th percentile, 191 pounds, 10-inch hands, 97th percentile, 32.5-inch arms, 85th percentile. He's a sticky man-to-man corner. Maybe the Buffalo Bills have some bad feelings about man-to-man corners because of the Kyer Elam experiment, but he was the talk of a lot of guys in Mobile. That is Thomas from Florida State. And another project, I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts on this guy, Darian Porter out of Iowa State, 6'2", 197, 33-inch arms.
I'm intrigued.
The fastest of anyone in Mobile at 21 plus mile per hour.
6'4", 200 pounds, though. That's, I mean,
projected to maybe be in the 4.2s at the combine raw, but he plays special teams. He was a former wide receiver, former special teams player. So he can maybe help you out there in the interim. The Tariq Woolen comps are very, very popular with him. 4.7 passer rating allowed in 2024, 3 picks, 2 pass breakups, only targeted 17 times in 11 games. So
yeah, our guy formerly of Cover One now with the Draft Network, Daniel Harms, wrote a nice little scouting report on him. Good athletic ability and the size, and obviously the ball skills. Being a former wide receiver, the knocks on him are what you would expect: poor tackling technique, things of that nature for a guy that hasn't played defensive back his entire life. And so you would think that with the right coaching and the right situation for him, there's certainly a ceiling there. And so, yeah, I think that's where people are going with those Tariq Woolen comps. I kind of understand that.
There was a couple of nickel corners that I think had some good days, but I don't think the Buffalo Bills really need a nickel corner. The last name I have on my list here is Quincy Riley out of Louisville, 5'10", 192, 32-inch arms. He was a 10x4 runner in high school. Likely is going to have 4.4-ish type of speed when we get to the combine in Indy. Some people were saying like, yeah, he might have looked slow on tape this year, but he was dealing with an injury. A couple of reps I saw in the one-on-one, he was patient. He didn't panic. He turned his head, which you always like to see. I know like we all have like Levi Wallace syndrome, afraid of corners that don't turn, that Dane Jackson syndrome, afraid of those corners that don't turn their head. But Quincy Riley, I think, had a good week in Mobile, and he could be in play for the Buffalo Bills
Quincy
at the tail end of round 2.
Yeah, he was. I highlighted him on mine as far as like guys who I wanted to talk about. Yeah, I mean, 29th best corner this year for PFF versus 638th a year ago. So certainly improved. Boundary corner fits the Bills archetype. 86% of his snaps on the boundary, multiple INTs in 3 straight seasons, 51.2% completion percentage allowed in zone coverage in 2024, which was 30th best of draft eligible corners with at least 275 coverage snaps. So certainly gives me the Bills vibe, passes the Bills vibe check, Quincy Riley.
Nabil comes in and says, Noel Williams is a round 4 guy to watch. And I'm glad you mentioned Noel Williams because the Shrine Bowl, I mentioned earlier in the show, when we were talking wide receivers, the corners dominated the wide receivers in Frisco this week, which is unusual. It's usually the other way around because the receivers have the advantage in a lot of those one-on-one drills. But there are a number of receivers worth talking about coming out of the Shrine Bowl. Siobhan Ravel was there interviewing. He was preseason first-round buzz. Like, oh, he's going to be this year's Quinyon Mitchell. Tore his ACL during the season. Not a lot of reps in college at ECU, so not a lot of tape to watch, but people were very, very high on him. He could still work out and get back into the end of round 1 conversation. I've seen him mocked to the Buffalo Bills. I think Mel Kiper mocked him to the Buffalo Bills in one of his early mocked drafts. But he was interview only. He's a name to watch out for. We could talk about him because he was technically at the Shrine Bowl, even though he didn't participate. Zay Alexander out of LSU, a guy I know that people like. Za Frazier out of UTSA, 6'2", 190. He's got some range, some good change of direction skills. He's a guy I want to look into and see at the combine. But there are 2 guys at the Shrine Bowl I really want to hitch my wagon to. One of them was the guy that Nabil talked about, Noel Williams. Buffalo scouted Cal a ton this year, like 4 or 5 times. You know, as someone mentioned that on Twitter, like Buffalo has been to Cal a lot this year. It's kind of weird. I think Noel Williams is a guy that the Buffalo Bills maybe have their eye on. I think he could go top 100. Like I know Nabil said round 4. I think Noel Williams could sneak into top 100. He had a big week in Frisco. He had a big game in the Shrine Bowl. And like I said, the cornerbacks dominated. And then the last guy I want to talk about, you have Kobe Bryant, the basketball player. Then you have Kobe Bryant, the nickel corner / safety out of Cincinnati that we loved a couple of years ago. And now we have Kobe Bryant, just the straight corner from Kansas, who had himself a week in Frisco. But here's the thing with Kobe Bryant. 5'10", 171. You heard that right. 171, 31.5-inch arms. The Emmanuel Forbes vibes and comps are very real with Kobe Bryant, but the one-on-one drills, which are, again, set up for wide receivers to have success, he dominated every receiver that lined up across him in Frisco this week. He not only dominated, but he was just chirping up and down the field. The man has the utmost confidence in his ability. He is twitchy, crazy ball skills. He went up for an insane, over-the-top, one-handed interception. He had 4 interceptions in 2024, 0 drops, right? Which is pretty good for a corner. He didn't drop any picks. He had 3 the year before, and when one of the reporters brought it up, he said, I know, I was so pissed off about my 3 dropped INTs in 2023 that I made damn well sure I didn't drop any in 2024. And he hit that jugs machine all summer. So it shows the kind of work ethic that Kobe Bryant has. Maybe a Mamba type mentality there from Kobe Bryant. So again, if there was any team that could maybe make a smaller corner work, it's the Buffalo Bills. Kobe Bryant, big fan of him, and Noel Williams coming out of the Shrine Bowl.
And the thing about Kobe Bryant too, even with that frame, and this could get him in trouble at the pros, is like he's willing to defend the run. Like he graded out well as a run defender of cornerbacks with at least 275 coverage snaps, only allowed a 45.8% completion percentage when in zone, which was 20th best of all the draft eligible corners. So I am a fan of Kobe Bryant. And like, how about that one other guy from the Shrine Bowl who probably isn't a great fit for the Bills, but Zay Alexander, really had a fun time looking into him. Another really good tackling corner, probably going to fit better in more of a man team, but he did play both in college and multiple INTs in 3 straight seasons, but graded out favorably as a zone corner as well for PFF. So no penalties against him in 2024 on 578 defensive snaps, which is pretty impressive for a corner. So also a fan of Zay Alexander from LSU.
Yeah, he was a guy I know that a ton of people were talking about. I didn't see his name too much, but he definitely has his fans, and he's someone else the Buffalo Bills should consider. One comment I wanted to get to before we leave here this evening, right? Because now we're done. We've broken down all the positions of need. Again, we'd love to talk safeties. We'd love to talk offensive line. We'd love to talk tight ends, running backs. The class is loaded, but we're going to restrain ourselves this evening and stick to just these positions of need that we have focused on. But Pete Nana comes in and says, we're doing a mock draft or two tonight, right? Well, here's the thing, Pete, and I'm standing by this, Dave. I said at the end of last year, and I'm standing by this. I will not be doing any mock draft simulators this year. I'm not touching them. I might do a couple of mock drafts on my own. I think we're going to do our Dane Brugler thing at some point. But this year, when you fire up the mock draft machines, you're doing all the picking, and I'm just going to sit and comment. I am not partaking in the mock draft simulators. I am taking a stand. I am civilizing the people here. I am done with mock draft simulators. They take up too much time in my life. They're pretty unhealthy for me. I also think that they kind of mess with people too much and get them in the wrong frame of mind and get people like upset when a certain player is picked here because the mock draft simulator told them they could go 3 rounds later. Like, no. So I know you were joking, Pete, but it's just a good way to bring it up. I will not be partaking in any mock drafts this offseason.
And I used to do in years past, I would do one a week starting in April leading up to the draft. So about 3 or 4 that I would post on social media. I'm not a volume mock drafter. I know like there are people out there who will put them on, online every day, like new ones and new ones. And I just think it waters it down a bit for me as far as like my process. But I'm also not going to knock people who like to do them. Like, do whatever you want.
Do whatever makes you happy.
Do whatever makes you happy. But I'm just not like, it's just not my thing. We'll do a couple on this show, maybe 1 or 2 that you'll react to, and we'll do some different scenarios. Maybe we'll get the comment section involved to kind of decide the players, because we usually get flamed for who we pick anyway. So we'll let the comments section decide probably in one of them. But yeah, I think it's a healthy stance to take this year. And especially now, it's only February 3rd. I mean, we got 2.5 months to go. So pace yourselves, people. Pace yourselves.
Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. As always, there are 3 ways in which you can support us here at the Air Raid Hour. The easiest way, level 1, tier 1, is to just smash that like button. Helps us with the algorithm. Step number 2 is hit that share button. Word of mouth is always appreciated. If you think there's someone out there who would really enjoy this conversation we had this evening, whether it was the top of the show about Maxx Crosby or Myles Garrett or Matthew Smiley, or the conversation we had as the show went along about Buffalo Bills positional needs and senior and Shrine Bowl players we think could fit those needs. If you think somebody would enjoy any of that, click that share button, text it to them, email it to them, share them on your socials. We would really appreciate that. And then the third thing, and this one is crazy how much this has helped us, and you guys are awesome. I thank you guys so much for this. When the show is done being live, if you could just go back when the show's available on demand for replay and leave a comment in the comment section, you guys are awesome. Like, you leave like 100+ comments every week with your takes and your ideas and your compliments and your criticisms. It's just awesome. There's always some trolls in there that I like to engage with. And it really boosts the algorithm when we have so much engagement. I don't think there's any show on the Cover One Network that gets like an engagement. And there are shows that get watched a ton more than us, because there are some great shows in this network. But I don't think anyone comments more in the comment section than they do on the Air Raid Hour. So we got that going for us, and that helps us out so much. We set some record-breaking numbers this year because you guys were willing to do those 3 things for us. You guys make the show. You guys are incredible in the comment section, bringing the things that you do every week. Pops Mafia comes in and says, so looking forward to the show each week. Thank you. That means a ton to us. Dave, any final thoughts for you out of here this evening?
No, this was a really nice kind of way to distract myself from what's going on next weekend. But I will say this, this is like it's like a nice shift in focus for us. I think like we got into that routine of doing pregame, and there's nothing like the season. Obviously we always say that, but the off season, we thrive in the off season as well.
I'm a real sicko too, because like early on in the show, I was kind of like Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby. I'm like, Darius Alexander. Like, I started to get like animated as we start talking about some of these prospects. Like, screw Myles Garrett, screw Maxx Crosby. There's some Senior Bowl prospects we're going to talk about this. That I started to get way more like sped up. I started to get way more like fidgety as we started talking about some of these prospects, because it's getting excited, getting back into the groove, talking prospects. So next week, free agency, we got to go back to the boring stuff for a little bit, because I guess we got to talk about it a little bit. Like, honestly, I'm literally position of need. We're like 3 dudes, because I'm not sifting through 800 piles of garbage for free agencies this year. So I don't know about you, but like, I'm gonna have like 3 dudes. It might be a little bit shorter of a show next week. I'm not
Well,
skipping like a 12-person list like we have in years past. Like I'm just
Yeah.
I'm not doing it.
Eric's done a couple good film cut ups and some
Mhm.
potential free agents. We'll incorporate that as well as far as some of the names from that. And yeah, we'll make sure we do it right, but it won't be
Mhm.
the same level of volume probably that we've had in years past.
I can't do that to myself. And the number of just hours I've spent like pulling up like PFF data and just like I can't do it. I will react to free agents this year. I will not try to preview free agents this year. And then after next week, it's combine preview because we're combine week almost. And then it's perfect timing combine reaction because the combine ends. So really, we only have to do one free agency show before free agency actually starts because we got the combine to keep us busy in between. So maybe do some XFL scouting or some UFL scouting too. Maybe get into that as well. Yeah, I'm sicko. I'm a real sicko. It's that time of year. But thank you guys so much. And Dave, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
All good. We can let the people go.
Smash that like on the way out. Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you as always. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comments section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!